Hi, my name is Gene Jordan. I'm a math professional development specialist here at Broomtire Boses, and I would like to give you a overview of the grade 9 module 1. Today I just want to give you some of the instructional approaches, the topics and lessons, just a brief outline of those, and I'm aiming for 5 to 10 minutes. I'm new to this, so forgive me for any mistakes. I'd also like to look at some of the connections with the middle school math and maybe algebra or geometry, or the further geometry and algebra 2 course. Let's look right into it. There's 4 topics in this first module. The first one is looking at the main functions that they'll be dealing with throughout the year: linear, exponential, and quadratic. The next is to look at expressions, dealing with polynomial expressions. Topic C is to look at the process in solving equations and inequality systems of 2 linear equations and inequalities, and the modeling cycle in topic D, which we'll talk about more later. Today's focus will be on A and B, and that is really just an overview. So if you're looking for detailed instructional strategies, that may be something I do later, but you really want to dig into the modules for that. Within every module, there will be focus standards, and that is going to be covered in that module. Usually it's 3 to 5 or so that are covered within a module. And these topics will change with the focus standards. Right off the bat, in lesson 3, you'd see this, the airplane question. I've had a few conversations with algebra teachers about this one, where they're drawing an elevation versus time graph. And so you need a little jump for that kid when they first, hopefully not, huh? But when they jump off the plane initially. Now, the time elevation graph, we'll look at the plane flying up into the air. It will account for all sorts of things, like I mentioned, jumping off of the plane and the falling off the plane until the parachute extends. The question itself, though, is a beautiful example, I think, of kids warming their feet, warming up to solving math with hand drawings. The other types of lessons they'll have will be problem sets, which I think everybody in math instruction is pretty comfortable with. We have problem sets. We also have Socratic dialogues, which are a little different than a lot of teachers are used to. And this is a 10-minute dialogue where you're walking through students and eliciting um, deeper answers to questions, having them think and extend their knowledge. Exploration, when you're looking at challenging problems, usually followed by a debrief where you clarify and expand their math knowledge. And finally, an integral part of algebra is the modeling. And we'll look at that. And that can include problems that are ill-defined without everything the student needs. They need to know what they don't know, so to speak. And they almost always have a real-world context. The lesson organization itself comes with, of course, your outcomes to begin with. Lesson notes, the classwork itself, the kind of things you'll need, and then exit ticket. And the exit ticket itself is a daily formative assessment that will give you feedback on if the kids really know what you taught them that day. The first lessons are probably the most critiqued in what I've seen, and the most skipped. And those are probably because of a slight misunderstanding. They're purely for exploration. They're just for them to get to know what graphs of quadratic equations or functions look like. It's really not to delve into the 4 steps of solving them or into anything like that, more than just to understand what the graphs look like. And so that's one thing to keep in mind when you tackle Module 1, the first few lessons, if you haven't already. It's important to look at, like, what are the focus standards, what are the strategies that help content make it accessible to all learners. You would have seen some real world examples. You'll see a lot of videos embedded within, and it's nice to do that reflection sheet, but I understand there may not be time every day. But if we go forward, you'll see lesson 5 as an example of an exploratory lesson. Again, for time's sake, I'm going to let you go ahead and look at that, but the graphing stories are on YouTube. I have an account where you can link them. They're also on Dan Meyer's blog. He's the one who created them. They're fantastic videos. Again, very much like the airplane model, where they're taking math and visualizing it with a hand-drawn model. Again, on lesson 5, one of the key questions that would be nice to think about in this lesson is look at this math practices. what kind of math practices are in. If you don't have math practices, there's 8 math practices embedded within all the learning standards. They're right in front of them, the algebra learning standards. And these math practices are things like precision, the ability to create and critique arguments. And so that's one of the things you want to do when we reflect on lessons. The Socratic lesson we talked about being a 10-minute or so discussion. The lesson will give you guidance there on how long it lasts on the big ideas that you were talking about today. I'm going to go ahead and move on. One of the key questions I think you want to ask yourself, as well as the how math practices come into play, are that every lesson has a component in pre-K to 5, fluency, conceptual understanding, and application. And we don't want to lose that in the high school and middle school. And I think it's key to include things like fluency in your daily lessons. Conceptual understanding, I think, is well embedded within the lessons as well as word problems. Again, the topics of the day, graphing stories include like this water consumption problem on a typical school day, giving them informative data that's going to be relevant to them and maybe trigger some connection to their actual life. Take a look at lesson 6. In lesson 6, they look through the algebra and polynomials in a different lens, possibly looking at geometric models. And this is an example of how using structure and expression to identify ways and rewrite it from different angles. I'm going to move sort of quickly through these. And what I wanted to talk about then is a very geometry-based idea of if-then statements, as well as statement reason proofs. And that you'll see them more and more in algebra, the way the kids, if they're writing something through a property, for example, like you see here, they're going to actually provide the property that corresponds. Nothing new to algebra in a sense, but I think the focus and the length of time the students spend with explanations is going to be what's different. Key points is here is those first lessons are not meant to cover it, just to introduce you to those topics. So a lot of teachers are frustrated with it, but it just introduce your students to it. If you're going to use that, that's the purpose. They require students to be aware that variables are just merely placeholders for numbers, not the actual numbers, of course. Conceptually, sometimes students have that problem. Timing of lessons, you can't meet everybody where you're at, so you don't have to find flexibility within your own presentation, the lessons that meet your kids where they're at, and bring them up to the rigor of the modules. But certainly be aware of where your kids are at. There's nothing that says you can't change them, modify them to meet where you are. Study carefully the lesson notes, especially on the physics and quadratic functions. It gets more complex. I found the notes very helpful to understand. The assessment's embedded within it, and it can be tricky as well. Basically, there's going to be tons of modeling on this mid-module assessment. If you have the time, which I highly, highly, highly recommend, you need to take the mid-module assessment, score it yourself, figure out how we're looking at the important learning standards. They give you the rubric. It's pretty self-explanatory. You've got a stepwise rubric that's progressive through mastery. Level 4 is the highest. And I'll leave that for you to look at. Key points among here is that the module ones are, you're given 2 days per assessment. So usually if you don't use all 2 days for giving the assessment, certainly 1 day for any remediation that's required. They've written these assessments to emulate as best they can the PARCC Type 2 and Type 3 type tests. So that's where they're aligned. You'll, I think, quickly notice that, that these assessments do not look exactly like, looking for you, do not look like the state assessment, and they're not designed to. They're designed to be a formative assessment that you can evaluate your students on where their thinking is with some rigorous questions. All right, that's it. I have, I gave you about 10 or so slides, I guess 27 slides, but it seemed like much shorter than that. There's a lot more, and all of these are from Engage New York on my network team link, and I put that link right there. So if you want to get these slides in their entirety from the expert folks at Common Core Incorporated, feel free to. And then if you have any questions for me, you can feel free to email me, and my link to some of the things that I find interesting on my website is right there as well. Thank you. Have a good day.